Good evening or good afternoon, everybody. I'm Luke Renda, and I'm here today with Mr. Matt Presti. Matt is the former president of the University of Science and Philosophy, formerly known as the Walter Russel Foundation. He is a poet, a philosopher, a meta-scientist. He is a farmer. He is a patriot. And he is one of the most inspiring people I have ever come across. And he's also a very busy guy, so I will bring him right in here. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
Hey, Luke. Pleasure to join you. Thanks for the invitation.
I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your time with me today. It's fantastic.
Anytime.
Why don't you just give a short pitch about yourself and maybe explain to the show followers who you are and what you're all about.
Well, I'm a musician. I'll say that. I love writing music, and I'm actually currently working on a new music project, and we're just getting started on that. So exciting times there. I spent the last 7 years working for the University of Science and Philosophy, formerly the Walter Russel Foundation. Main goal was to get the artwork back out on display, which is half of his message. You know, his demonstration of his message working is that body of artwork. So that last 7 years was spent in earnest, and with the acquisition of a nearly $1 million building, we set up and moved and set up 64 tons of art sculpture and personal effects, and really just a tremendous life accomplishment, if you will. Prior to that, I was a sound man for 15 years. I ran sound professionally in the greater St. Louis area and traveled around the United States doing corporate sound shows and conventions, things of that nature. And then various other jobs in life, you know, getting to where you want to go is always it's a lifelong process, but the journey goes on. And I could take it back, but you know, I guess just the last 7 years really is the pinnacle of life for me, and that's probably a lot of what we're going to talk about today, I imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've really worked towards this goal, and you've accomplished it. I think you took how many tons of artwork out of storage and put it on display?
64
tons.
11 tractor trailers basically, and it was with 7 people. We moved it all and loaded it and unloaded it, and I fork trucked it up on the truck and forked it off and moved it into place as close as we could get. And so it was about a 1.5 year long setup, I'd say, but we eventually got to the point of July 4th, which was the official reopening of what was all at Swannanoa Palace back in 1998 before it moved into storage. And then we did the grand opening on November 1st of 2019. There's a video on philosophy.org/videos. If you click historical videos, there's the chronicle of that actual move in about a 30-minute presentation.
Cool. Yeah, it's quite the feat. It must be amazing to watch, actually.
Yeah, it brings back memories. It's like, yeah. I was either crazy to try to do something like that or seriously driven. But the truth is I was seriously driven. The inspiration that I pass on was passed on to me by Walter Russel, who's no easy study. You don't just read 1 or 2 books by Russell and think you got the whole thing figured out. I mean, it takes years of discernment, years of validation by observation in nature, deep thinking sessions with yourself alone, where you think about the two-way motion universe. And eventually, over the years, this culminates into an actual, you realize Russell wasn't writing fiction. He wasn't writing theories or even concepts. He wrote manuals. Mm-hmm. These are manuals on how nature works, not theories. Mm-hmm. So this theoretical jumbo jive stuff that a lot of people throw out at him, the term crank and crackpot and pseudoscientist, blah, blah, blah. None of that holds water. A deep cursory study of Walter Russell you'll find that out, that it's actually a manual for nature. So
Yeah, that's what I found reading his work as well. I had these sort of concepts in my head, but reading his work, he really just sets you up for like how to achieve things in your life.
absolutely.
And it's, yeah, very inspiring, and it is a manual. It's absolutely amazing.
Yep.
So how long ago was it that you first came in contact with the work of Walter Russell?
It would have been 2008 when I actually read The Secret of Light. So I acquired the book in 2006 at a used bookstore, and it was like, $2 bottom shelf. I either kicked it with my foot or I just noticed it at the bottom of the shelf, and there it was. And I was collecting a lot of Freemasonic books, trying to get into studying that and get to know what is the big secret of Masonry and all that. Never joined, but it was still an interesting subject to try to unpack. But yeah, when I discovered that book, I just figured it was a Freemasonic book, so I threw it onto the shelf with the other books that I was collecting at the time, and wouldn't read it for 2 years actually. So it came around one October in 2008 morning, and I was looking for something to read. I just finished a book by Terence McKenna, and I'm like, okay, I gotta read something really good. And I just kind of thumbed through, and oh yeah, I remember this one I bought a couple years ago. And I read the first couple pages and I just went, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for. So as they say, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear, huh?
It's absolutely true. Yeah, I do the same thing. I'll collect a few books and it'll sit on my shelf for a few years. And when the time is right, I'll pull it out. And what is this? And then it'll be the perfect thing to read at that perfect time in my life.
Exactly.
And that's how you know you're actually following that true path. Is when those synchronicities start lining up and you kind of know you're onto something, right?
That is everything right there. I mean, I can't tell you how many I have in a day anymore. And when you go and sin no more, in other words, you quit lying to yourself and quit lying to others. That doesn't mean you tell the truth to a liar. That makes you a fool.
Yeah.
But you got to be honest with yourself. You can't dabble in shadow anymore. You have to, what they call walking in the light is more than just advice. It's a way of living. And you will not find synchronicities if you got one foot in shadow and the other in an attempt to be straight up, forward, and honest with yourself. I mean, there's the old saying, don't kid yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and people that kid themselves, they never achieve the kind of synchronicities that one who's not kidding themselves will. So there's an absolutely serious side to the pursuit of self-development, but it requires certain honesty with yourself, number one, or you don't really have any business even trying to be on that path. You might as well dabble with the Faucis of the world, because that's where that path leads.
Mm-hmm.
Criminally insane psychopathy is the opposite end of that spectrum. And then you got your Christhood or your Christ conscious, examples on the other side. So, and it's really a choice, and it's free will. Free will makes it possible. So that's the spectrum. And if you want to get into synchronicities, just keep walking that path, because it's going to lead to an awareness of the divine that you wouldn't otherwise have.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And if you're going to lie to yourself, there's nothing to stop you from lying to everyone else.
Bingo.
Yeah. So
Can't have one without the other,
you
right?
can't. No. And I remember you saying, you wouldn't even pick up a penny off the street anymore, because you're just walking that path. If it's not yours and if you didn't earn it, don't take it.
Right. Well, if you'll take a penny, you'll steal a million. It's not the quantity that matters, it's the act of doing it at all. So, again, that's what go and sin no more means to me. It's not a biblical meaning. It's a character perspective, that to be the best character that you can be in this world unto yourself first, because you have no business trying to be good to other people if you're not good to yourself. Everything starts on the inside and flows outward. So the more you can shape up the more you can give out, that honest you that is waiting and struggling and has been pushed into the back seat, while this pseudo self drives the vehicle at 90 miles an hour toward a brick wall,
Hmm.
but whatever it takes to get it there, and it's recognition of the divine within man himself and working with it knowingly. That's what creates the synchronicities, one after the other after the next. And the closer you get to the center, the more it happens. So that's kind of the gauge.
Yeah, and sometimes that suffering and those making those wrong choices is what's going to lead you to that path, right? It's that
Sure.
that law of balance. You stray one side or the other, it's going to bring you back to the center or destroy you, really.
Yep. And therein is a great lesson in tripping over your shadow. Borrow a Jungian term if you want. The shadow is an important teacher too, but careful you don't spend too much time with it,
Yeah,
because it can devour as well.
absolutely. Absolutely. Um, Maybe going back a bit to your younger days, were you always sort of interested in this type of spiritual stuff? Like, do you have any early memories of sort of coming across maybe, like what you would call like your true self?
I'd have to go back to when I was very little. I mean, I was always called to go out into the woods, and it wasn't really woods. I lived in a subdivision, so it wasn't woody like a rural area,
Hmm.
but there were woods, there were wild little areas, and those were the places you'd find me, where no one else was. And I'd be under the honeysuckle bush, and there'd be a wild cat, next to me. That was where I was, where no humans dared to tread. And because I was engrossed by my imagination. And then I remember getting vaccinated at 4.5 years old, and that played a world of effect on me, because at that point, I don't have a memory of myself. And I'll say this is with some um, it's a sad thing to think that a substance can disconnect you from the creator, but that's kind of been the path that I had to go on. And so that voice would have been louder, I think, had I not been damaged by these things. And it took literally years to overcome that damage, and much work to overcome it. I had developed, because of that, I'm convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the inability to listen. And people would have to call my name 4 or 5 times, louder each successive time, before I finally went, huh? You talking to me? So, I mean, that lasted up until my late 20s,
Hmm.
and then I began to seek earnestly around the age of 33, interestingly enough. That was sort of the coming to myself moment, the dedication that I decided I was going to do something to turn my life around, because I didn't like the direction it was going. And it was sort of aimless and without a compass, if you will, as the Masons would say. So you want to have some direction in your life, and where you need to go inside. It's just we don't listen, and that was really, I'd say, the start at age 33 in earnest, to begin to listen to that small voice inside me. So that led me through one teacher after another, one set of books after another set of books, and more podcasts. And back when, podcasts were young in the 2000s, all through up to 2013, 14 in there. But eventually I would find, the greatest teacher that I've ever come across, and that's Walter Russell, because what he did for me was made me hone in on the final upgrades, the final dotting of the I's and crossing of the T's, and the final alchemical transformation of myself into a being that began to recognize its own power. That's really the culmination of the Russell teachings. They gave to me the power to understand exactly what I am and how to use it for whatever end. It could be anything. Surviving the apocalypse is going to be, it's a spiritual boot camp for all of us. But I'll tell you what, if you've got teachings that you can muster the power within you as your support through this kind of a process, then it's going to be a lot easier than, say, someone who has no idea, about the workings of the universe or the power of their consciousness. But eventually, that, as all stories end, good ending at the end of this one, that, I've transitioned out of the university, but not without first having done something really great, which couldn't have been done any other way. And it just so happened that I was at the captain's chair for the unveiling of precious artwork that's been out of the sight of human eyes for some nearly 21 years.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing accomplishment. I hear you're an amateur curator as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Having no experience in museum curation, I received 3 really hefty compliments from 30 plus year veterans of museum curation. And that one was in particular, this museum is perfect. So that was interesting. I didn't even consult museum decorating guidelines. You're supposed to hang pictures at a certain height between this many inches and that many inches for the maximum conveyance. And you're not even going to be able to join the Museum Association of America unless you meet all these qualifications. But so we don't even need to do that. It's the museum, the masterpiece that is the work of Walter and Leo Russell stands right there for everybody to see. And, decorating, this was a master's work. So you have some reverence for it, and you want to handle it as delicately as you can too, because you're talking, some of these pieces were monumentally awkward to move and very heavy. So fortunately, in my 15 years of audio freelance in St. Louis, I unloaded and loaded probably more than 1,000 trucks with many other guys on shows. And so I had some bit of knowledge about moving and packing loads. And we were really able to do this in a masterful way. And masterful art deserves no less than a masterful effort. And just setting it up and decorating it all, and the enormity of this man's work and what he, like I said, you don't just read one Russell book and understand anything about the man. You've got to, if you're really going to do any cursory study with any great master of anything, it takes many years to really get into it. Like Jung, I would imagine that, just because you read the Red Book, let's say, no one's a master on Jung. He's got probably hundreds of file cabinets of information that people would have to delve through to really to glean an understanding of a soul of that magnitude. Mm-hmm. So we have these giants on whose shoulders we stand, and they all deserve the respect that it takes to really put the time in if you're going to come away with a true understanding and also be able to share what you've learned with others accurately that talk about the man and his accomplishments and his wife as well.
Yeah, that's something I focus on a lot, as well as making sure I cite who I'm referencing and making sure they get the credit, because that's what helped me, other people doing that, and then I could follow up on those threads. And if that is kind of left out, maybe we wouldn't have come across these people, and it wouldn't have, changed our lives. And also it's respect. It's part of that respect of, because they went through this journey too, and I don't think it was easy. And
true,
it's credit where it's credit's due.
And to not forget too, that what would they want for us but to become giants ourselves and eventually have your own quotes.
Yeah, that's right.
Your own references, because you're living an authentic, original, and very inspired life.
So with the music, were you into that at a young age?
Yeah, I'd say around age 7 is okay. When, I was at a friend's and they had a piano, and I'd start playing little things with one finger, and interestingly enough, Walter Russell has a similar story, but he started at 8 months, on the piano with one finger. So I was a late bloomer. And I think a lot of the reason, as I alluded to earlier, was that vaccination that stunted the growth process. But ultimately, as all things, you can come back from anything, man. You can come back from it. It takes hard work, but it's possible. My musical unfoldment would be mostly on the piano. My parents bought me a little piano for Christmas at 8 years old because they saw my interest in it. I think they took me to a dinner with friends, and there was a piano there, and that's maybe where they saw me. If I recall right, saw me gain an interest in it. But over the years, I would continue to upgrade. Let me see. I had a piano around here somewhere. It's this big. That's what my first one was. Little electronic thing. You can only play one note at a time.
Right.
But eventually, I got a Casio, and then after the Casio, I was let's see. I went to a Yamaha, and there it is, a DX100, which is another little sort of miniaturized. You could wear it like a guitar.
Right.
And so then I needed something bigger, and I got a job, and I worked, and my first purchases were all musical equipment. So when you get a keyboard, then you need an amplifier, and then you want to sing, so you need a PA system. Well, I didn't even have a car till I was 24 years old. So but I had a rockin' PA and a bunch of equipment and a bass guitar and bass amplifier and microphones. And, it was more important for me to get musical equipment than it was to drive. But having the only PA in the neighborhood, everybody came to pick me up on a Friday night so I could haul my crap over to their house and blast their neighbors out with loud music, so that was a benefit. But there's always a trade-off, right?
Yeah. Do you think that musical interest and that practicing of that is something that helped you sort of come back to yourself as well?
Indeed, because I was instantly went with, I've had three piano lessons in my life, 2 when I was 13 that were a half hour each, and then one about 3 years ago. I'm like, I want to learn to play music. And I went and sat down. This lady, she goes, okay, she goes, can you play something for me? Because I'm going to have you work on Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. She goes, but I just want to see what your quality is as far as, how you play. So I just whipped out one of my originals, and her jaw dropped. And then there was a kid coming in right after me, and he's sitting there, and he looks over and he goes, why do you need lessons? And he just was bewildered. And I'm like, because everybody can improve, everybody can. But I ended up dropping it because sort of, I guess, the way I learned music was through my own inspiration, and I play by ear. I've always played by ear, and I figured things out in my own head.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me there was something too mechanical about reading music, and it seemed to be a limitation, that I'm glad I didn't do it, because I had to force myself to learn techniques that I wouldn't have otherwise learned. And being a left-hander, to me, a piano should be the other way. The high notes should be up on the left hand and low notes on the right hand. So that's pretty much every instrument. I learned to play on a right hand guitar upside down. My first bass was a right-handed bass. I flipped it upside down. Just that's how I had to do it. But that also opened up chance opportunities to unfold certain techniques that I wouldn't otherwise have done. And I can play a right-handed bass or a left-handed bass or guitar, but I'll flip it upside down to do it if it's right-handed, but it doesn't limit me where others might not have that ability. Same with a drum set. I'm learned to drum on my own, taught myself how to play drums, and I'm doing some things better than guys who have been playing 30 years, but it's just all about your four-limb independence. Use that left foot on that hi-hat and and all four limbs are moving, doing something different. That was a huge help. Drums and keyboard really were the greatest musical instrument teachers that I've had, and vocals too, because that's actually your instrument, right? It's the instrument inside you is your voice. So that's the only instrument we're all born with.
Right. Cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I had similar experiences too, being stunted as a young man as well, and even into my later teens before I went to go traveling the world, I got a few of these injections, and it was night and day after
Yeah.
getting them. And
Yeah.
it took me like up until now almost to get, because I was stupid enough to take them when I didn't know too much when I was 18, 19.
Right.
And like I used to have sort of natural shamanic experiences from a very young age, and at right after I took those last shots, I didn't have them after
Yep.
that. It was something I have to work back to, but yeah, it's absolutely a travesty what happens to the younger people, including in like the school system and stuff like that. Did you go to public school? Is that
I did, and you nailed it, bud. I got to tell you, I think this is a nefarious, very nefarious program to purposely stunt otherwise natural development in human beings. It's sort of like the circumcision. It's barbaric as can be, and I could use expletives, but I think everybody gets the point. That trauma-based mind control that we're dealing with in this world. What sets somebody up for failure better than injecting them with a toxin their body ultimately can't integrate, without some kind of damage, and it takes time, and it could take a lifetime. And think of just all the autism, the spectrum of autism that opened up from vaccinations. These kids could have been Mozart's, Beethoven's, Mozart's, and Shakespeare's, incredible minded people that because of this, seemingly public health vaccination program, now they're stunted. So all growth, despite the fact that it's been stunted, can find new roots, new ways of raising itself. And I just had to point what you said there is just, and you look at school systems today and the fact that they're trying to vaccinate 4-year-olds, this Pfizer and this Moderna, and it's absolutely beyond the pale. And these are criminally insane psychopaths that we're dealing with. And, there's really only two sides of one fence, and that fence is the fence of righteousness. You're either on the right side of it or you're dabbling in that darkness, and God help those children whose parents don't see the light. I mean, they're literally committing their children to a death sentence, and it's a shame, and I feel for them. There's just nothing I can do. You can't, unfortunately, with free will and freedom, you have to allow other people to be free if you yourself want the same anonymity. So, it's as difficult as it is to watch. This is a free will universe, and it's made that way purposefully. So it should not take you off the path of still pursuing the unfoldment of your own divinity and your acknowledgement of it and the learning of using it in your daily life.
Absolutely. I just got an order from the university, but I was reading this.
All right, good book.
Isn't that amazing? But what they say in it is nature doesn't punish, it just gives back which it was given in kind.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's the lesson that people need to learn. I mean, I can't imagine like what happens to these kids, like you say, circumcision, and like now at 38 years old, a 5-year-old probably has more vaccines than I have.
Right.
Because it just has increased and increased and increased. And it's
that's
like
by design. That's the terrible part of it all. Until there can be more resistance against these programs, and we're seeing it. 20 years ago, there was no resistance. As I looked around the world knowing 9/11 was an inside job, outside job, it's the same, it's both. And just trying to talk to people in 2002 was like pulling teeth. I mean, everybody thought you were a nut job if you mentioned anything about 9/11 that wasn't what the TV said, so. But those, talk about lonely days, those were lonely days. And then I think back to Jordan Maxwell. He started his journey of awakening in 1956.
Yeah.
And the book you just held up was written about that time, and they're talking about communism and how it's the great destroyer of civilization, and how human termites, also known as communists, have infiltrated the United States government. That's a hell of a book. And they knew, the Russells knew back then. In fact, all great minds really knew. Ayn Rand was another. She came from the desolation of communism and saw it trying to creep into the structures in the United States. So kudos to anyone who had the foresight to predict these things. The John Stormers and the John Birches of the world. They really tried to raise the alarm bell.
The Eustace Mullins and
yep.
Even Young in that book, The Undiscovered Self, it's 1957 or 58 or something. And
G. Edward Griffin, you got all these great minds. These are the living flames, if you will, that are, we just lost Jordan, but he, his work was indelible in contribution to the furtherance of humanity and its awakening. I didn't agree with a lot of some of the, not everything he said, of course, but who do you really agree with everything they say? Even Russell, there's a couple things but he's probably the least of those who I don't agree with, or who I disagree with based on his writings. But he really lived a demonstrable life of focus and purity, and really, just being able to go into any situation with full-on awareness. And that's really what we're lacking today. Is people, we're trying to get there. We're seeing a bit of the unfoldment happen. It's time consuming and it takes time. It's why a lot of people shy away from it, because it takes work. It takes work to look at information that's not coming from your television. It's easy to listen to somebody tell you how to think and shape your worldview. So the more we get this awakening process, especially within us, we live it. It's not something to believe in, it's something that you live. You choose consciously not to vaccinate, right? Yourself or your children, I'm assuming. So until others can take that responsibility, they're always going to be giving their power to an external force. And that's really what we're up against, is the misuse of other people's power given away freely, which, if that could be reversed, it would result in, as Carl Jung wrote in The Undiscovered Self, the rekindling of the individual away from the collective, right?
Absolutely. And it's that courage that you need to strike out on your own path and to be alone as well, and to face those challenges, right? It's not the most popular path in the world, that's for sure. And I remember those times exactly as you say, the early mid 2000s. No one wanted to hear anything about anything. You know what I mean? They just wanted to have their head in the sand. And it's interesting now, there's a lot of older people coming up to me and saying, hey, we should start like a documentary group, or hey, we should start a study group, or hey, we should get into like looking at this alternative information. And I was trying to do that way back then, but no one was ready for it, right? They just weren't ready.
You get the occasional person who's like, these sons of bitches need to be stopped. we got to get them now. It's like, dude, where were you 20 years ago?
Yeah.
This is when you're new, when you fresh come out of the egg, you're a little pissed off, right? Because suddenly you discover that the entire world that you were drilled into your head in school is not the way it really truly is. And science is the greatest of all of the frauds right now, and has been. And that's what started me in my pursuit, because I wanted, after reading Russell, and I knew that this was a manual, not just a theory, I needed something in me, wanted to absolutely wipe the floor with science and start over. So that was my motivation originally, was not necessarily even the artwork. I didn't even know there was artwork. I just knew that Russell's science was a hell of a levels and levels above the current one-way Jesuit science that's now being taught, this bangology, which is ludicrous and so unlike nature. It's a travesty, and that's how Russell would term it. He did call quantum physics a travesty of nature because it has no existence. So why do people dabble in it?
It's insane.
You see what I'm saying? You're playing mental gymnastics with yourself, and you'll never come away with a true understanding of the universe when you believe in this kind of garbage, even though it's sense-based and the senses have tricked man into believing this. But, until we unlock the two-way motion universe and get away from the Jesuit Lamate one-way heat death dying universe that consigns both the creator and creation to a death sentence, we're never going to have a true understanding of the universe. So ultimately, that's what Russell provides from a scientific standpoint. Now, the philosophy, on the other hand, is a spiritual foundation for man that is beyond anything I've read from any Eastern ideology or philosophy. It's a Western idealism, if you will, and it's absolutely true to nature. You can't explain mind any better, So it's going to take time, like anything. Like 9/11 took time. After 10 years, maybe 3% more people in the world were ready to hear about it. But maybe now you're seeing that with all the COVID theater of the past 2 years, that humanity is reaching and it's multiplying. So again, back to the person who's angry that, I just woke up a year ago. Why isn't anybody doing anything? Welcome to the club, man. You need to temper down a little bit and realize that, certain things have to play out in order for us to reach certain places. It's not going to, justice isn't going to come overnight. This is something that has been operating in the shadows for so long. You can shine a spotlight on it, but there's still 80% of this thing that needs to be, the light shined upon it. So it's going to take time, but ultimately it will pick up speed, and it is. It's certainly multiplying faster than, the last 20 years that I've watched in agony. People believe this lying media. So that's a good sign.
It was agonizing.
Yeah.
And
did you have a wake up about the same time?
Yeah, I was always sort of against, like, I didn't fit in school. I only liked one or two classes that I took, like psychology and English, and every other class I didn't really go to. I was always a bit different, and even my friends would like bring me like these books, like The Brave New World. My friend, when we were like 15, he's like, oh, you got to read this. And I was like, why? And he's like, because this is like what you talk about all the time. And coming across even the Tao Te Ching, a friend brought it to me, and he was like, it had no cover on it. It was this old book. And he just said, you got to read this. And again, I was like, I kind of smiled and was like, why? And he's like, because this is how you think. He's like, you will actually understand this. Whereas, and starting to read that stuff, I was pretty young, 15, 16. There's a lot of words I didn't get. And the way it's translated is in a bit of a different way than, you're used to reading. But I just read it. And it's like I understood it deep inside myself,
Yeah. And interesting you say that. There was a forum I used to be involved in back in 2005, 6, 7, up until like 2011-ish, somewhere in there. And in 2006, I found it awkward, but I posted something, real detailed post, and I just went into the spiritual explanation of a few things. And this cat on the post, he responds, he was from Canada too. He writes, dude, you sound a lot like Walter Russell. And I'm like, who the fuck is that? Right? Who is Walter Russell? And anyways, he put a link to the philosophy.org. I remember going and looking at it, and it was a kind of a cheap website with army green, and it was just pretty plain. And I'm just like, what is all this? So I was given the opportunity to look, and I just didn't. I wasn't interested. But, fortunately, I was able to come across his work after a pretty trying time in my life. I would say, I would add that 2 days later, that book appears, and the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, for me too, maybe around 2006, 2007, that was a pretty dark period in my life as well, because of all the self-made suffering,
Yep.
and eventually you get that calling, like, do you want to live, or do you want to die, or do you want to achieve, or do you want to be nothing?
Right.
And I had to step it up, and it's hard being isolated, right? And that's what these great thinkers kind of gave me, was, hey, you're not the only one who thinks like this.
Yeah.
And then when you feel like, okay, now there, someone, it's like, you're not the only one who is suffering here, and you're not the only one who is being isolated. And
Right.
even coming across the work of like Michael Tsarian, he gave me a lot of that too with some of his documentaries. Like, I'm not the only conspiracy theorist in the world. I'm not the only one who, and he brought up Ayn Rand and Krishnamurti and a lot of those people. And so it kind of just, it gives you a camaraderie in a way,
Yeah. It's nice to know you're not alone in being alone.
Yeah.
The only one that's alone reading about the human psyche or the history of secret societies and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Michael's work is stellar. I've always respected it, and David's really doing some incredible stuff too. And it's those people that have that work ethic. And especially in this conspiracy subject study, it takes a little something extra to really go that extra mile. Like the Eustace Mullinses and the G. Edward Griffins of the world, and so many authors. Hell, David Icke. I went through an Icke phase in 2003, 4, and 5. Read everything I could get my hands on. Then I booked out of that into another phase, and eventually would culminate, with the discovery of Russell. But this journey is something miraculous. It's something special, and you should enjoy the journey, not be angry with it like someone who just woke up. It's they're going to go through that anyways, but that's their time. They're figuring out what we figured out 20 years ago. And I wasn't happy when I started to figure that I'd been lied to my entire life. Science is wrong, pretty much everything. So, and our government is infested by communist termites.
Yeah, the Reds under the beds. Who knew it was true? Hey.
Yeah, exactly. And now, basically what Terence McKenna called, he said, we're being led by the least among us, right? The least noble, the least honest, the least virtuous,
least accomplished.
Yeah. And these people are in charge of everything. And that's why it's all screwed up. And they're all Ivy League college graduates. And look at the state of it. You would think it'd be the shining beacon on the hill. Look at this government. It's staffed by college graduates from Harvard and Yale. It should be the living beacon of light on the hill, but it's not. It's a swamp. So what's that tell you about college? Didn't work for these people. The United States government has been in debt since 1836. So you tell me what company, what corporation could run a sheet in the red since 1836 and still have a company, it's right there. That right there is proof enough that these people should not be listened to ever. No, right?
You're not qualified to run a corner store.
Right. They're not qualified to lead rats through a sewer pipe.
Yeah. Nice. Well, and it's because of all that college and all that learning is based on things that are not true in nature, right? That's the thing, is a lot of this stuff is not true at all, and it's not backed up by nature.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the health stuff. It's like people don't trust nature, and so they're looking for this artificial something else to
And
help
as
them, you know?
Jung would say, they haven't discovered themselves yet. They're operating in a fiction, which is this pseudo self that thinks it's learning, and what it's learned is all there is, and knows nothing yet about its own self.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the disconnect, and that's your collectivism to the root right there.
Yeah.
And Jung hacked at the root while everybody else was hacking at branches. So there are those great ones among us whose work is, something to pick up and something to cherish, because we'd have no idea about it otherwise.
No, we'd be still in a dark cave of knowledge, There would be barely the flicker of light in there,
Yeah, indeed.
And it's that inner directed, that inner knowing, right? Not this, everyone's looking for it from outside of themselves. And that is one of the things that I've been taught by you and by the Russells. It's that inner knowing, everyone's trying to prove facts and this and that. And you know what? It's not going to happen from out there. It's only
Right.
going to come from within.
Yeah. And there will be synchronicity after synchronicity once you start trusting in that process. And it is a process, the process of communing directly with your consciousness, which consciousness is God, if you want to really call it that. I mean, in consciousness, there will be some differences between the Russells' view of it and like a Carl Jung, who also talked about the unconscious, right? So, but consciousness, really, if you think about it, is truly all there is, because if you're unconscious of some knowledge, it's not that the knowledge doesn't exist, right? It's that we're unconscious of its existence. So it doesn't disprove consciousness as being the creator, right? The creator is all conscious. Everything, every bit of knowledge that could be in existence is in this universal mind, which is omnipresent. All motion moves upon it. That's where it gets its instructions. So the farthest star is moving on the knowledge of the creator. It doesn't end. It's in between all motions, centering and bounding them. And that's the beauty of the Russell message. It really explains God scientifically, where all the science has failed, doesn't even attempt to explain it. Russell basically, he would remonstrate science and say, the cardinal error of science was removing the creator from his own creation. I mean, why would you remove Da Vinci from the Mona Lisa? Why would you remove Tesla from the AC generator? As if these things just pop up without a mind. It takes a mind, it takes knowledge and the mind field to express through a living body, using your two strong arms to build the body, which is in your mind, for it to exist. And that's probably the biggest problem with most people is they don't hold a thought. They just go from one to the next.
Right.
And life ends up pretty boring because all your ideas are somebody else's, and you're enjoying everybody else's ideas as opposed to building your own. So I think we're going to see a lot more of the self-reliance return as we go through this physical, mental, and spiritual boot camp over the next few years.
Yeah, let's hope so. You were saying about consciousness. So like the medical term for autistic is different than the psychological term. The psychological term of being like an autistic person, the way that the old psychologists like Eric Fromm and stuff would use, is that basically conscious processes are unconscious if they're actually on automatic. So it's like, how things like your blood circulates, your heart pumps on its own. That's supposed to be an unconscious process, but there's these conscious processes that have become automatic. And so it's like, it's just like less and less consciousness is happening, right? And
well, that's arguable. I mean, the Russells, from the perspective of the Russells, they basically called that anything that runs without your awareness, right? There's awareness and then there's consciousness. Awareness is what you're aware of, what your senses feel, touch, taste, smell, and see. Your awareness, you're not aware that your heart's beating 36 times a minute, right? I mean, unless it's really racing and you're like just got done running a race and you're like, you feel that heartbeat, right? But typically you're not aware that your stomach is digesting food. You're not aware that your kidneys are filtering your blood. You're not aware that your liver is creating enzymes, and all these different processes in the body that take place don't require your awareness, but they do require the consciousness of the creator in order for them to run.
Right.
If God were to withdraw his division into bodies, all the universe would collapse. It would be over. And the Big Bang Theory would be right. The big crunch would have happened and everything would have froze and died. And that's the it, kaplunk, it's over. But it's not that way. You know, basically the Russells would call that instinct control. God is instinct control or God control in animals. So that's why you don't see animals building freeways or skyscrapers or forming unions. You know, you don't see, as Rush would say, the maples form a union against the oaks demanding equal rights.
Yeah.
Right? They don't have, that's bullshit. There's no time in nature because it's run by the creator himself, itself. And that creative mind doesn't have imbalances in it. That's why civilization, the civilization called nature does not rise and fall. It just is, and it's perpetual because it's God controlled and instinct controlled. Whereas man's civilizations, man has been freed through what we call free will, right? We've been freed in order to have the choice or not to express our divinity. And that's the difference between us and nature. We've been given a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's got to be free will, because you can even believe with your free will that we have no free will. You're free to believe that too. You know, that this universe is an accident. It's a one-way heat death dying Big Bang Jesuit monstrosity that confirmed what the Pope called Genesis 1:1 when LeMaitre introduced it in 1931. And I think that he introduced it because of Russell's Universal One book. You got to remember in 1929, I believe it was circa 1929, the Catholic Church contacted Dr. Russell and told him, do not reprint the Universal One or the Pope is going to issue a decree against it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you got a decree issued against you in any business, you are never going to work again. Okay. That's how powerful these people were. And perhaps they still think they are, but they're not. They're losing it, and it's good. You know, it's very good that they're losing it because they couldn't hold it back. But the point I was trying to get to was that LeMaitre came out with his Big Bang in 1931, just a few years after Russell's two-way motion universe was making the rounds and circulating. You know, he did send it to 300 universities and 700 scientists around the world. Einstein got a copy. And on his deathbed, Einstein told his friend, Nick, I can't remember his last name, but he mentioned that he regretted and lamented that he did not study Walter Russell's Universal One more thoroughly. You know, now he was out of time. Mm-hmm. So, and then you got Tesla says, lock it away for 1,000 years because mankind's not unfolded enough to even begin to understand it. So Tesla knew he was right, you know, and that's from a scientific angle. It's incredible. I mean, the knowledge in that book, and had we had the past since 1930, a two-way motion universe understanding, we would have quite a different world today. We would not have waste from energy production. We would not have nuclear fallouts, nuclear meltdowns, radiation worries. We would not be in the situation we're in. In fact, we would probably have a much cleaner environment overall because the use of power would have been done in a different way that is in line and in tune with nature and the frequencies that nature produces. Instead of 50 cycle hertz, 60 hertz cycle, you know, which does cause health problems and stimulation problems and adrenal glands. And we all live inside a 60 hertz prison, if you will. And the effects of that, we don't really know what the great long-term effects are. Could be an increase in cancer. No one's really studied it. So all this misuse of just the theory, right? A theory became a law prematurely, and now the Big Bang is what's taught to all these children in school.
It's the stupidest fucking thing ever.
Well, it begs to be questioned. It begs some rethink. I mean, something exploded. What was that something before it exploded? You know, and that's what led them to this big crunch nonsense. You know, but that's what Walter Russell so elegantly put a bullet into the heart of, was this idea that you could have a creation at all without a creator, any more than you could have a painting without a painter or a poem without a poet. It's the exact, why would there be one law for the universe but something different for the rest of this little human species? You know, that's the problem with science. It was funded in the direction of a one-way heat, death, dying model. It was funded to the hilt of millions and millions, if not billions of dollars. The Nobel Prizes went to these people. You know, all this fantastic science fiction. It's all science fiction.
Science
Just like
fiction.
this. Yeah, this interdimensional stuff is too. It's, people don't even know what a dimension is, right? And they're talking as if there's ones beyond the third, and they have no clue what it even is. So, whole nother thing we can get into, but the science is really, it's half the equation, because the philosophy, the living understanding of how to use it, you know, what are you going to make once you figure out you can make anything? And why would you make that thing? You know, there's a why behind everything too, for meaning, for purpose. And if the purpose isn't good, like nuclear power, you know, they didn't have to do that, but they ran with some ideas that Dr. Russell put out into the university lectures that he went around to different universities. And when he put that out there, they went and they took his direction. He said, over here, you're going to find this. Here's this over here. And they found heavy water. They found deuterium. And what did they do with it? They created atomic fission.
Well, and the fact that the Big Bang is sponsored by the Vatican tells you everything you need to know.
Right. Well, it's science has a Catholic foundation.
Yeah.
And it's Jesuit.
Wow.
Georges Lemaitre was a Jesuit priest. So he's no fool, right? You got 15 years of intense study to even become one in the first place. But it just so happens that he puts out this one-way dying universe model just 4 short years after Dr. Russell put a continuous two-way motion universe model out to the world. It seems that they had to usurp it before it would catch on.
Yeah.
And that's all they promoted, is this, you know, what you tell me, what one-way thing in nature exists? Is there such a thing as a monopole? Is there anything truly one way in nature?
No.
Right. So why is it that the origin theory of the universe is one way?
Yeah.
How can that be? There's your glaring contradiction right there. You
Shows
mean you just exhale? That's all you do? What about inhaling? Oh, we just conveniently missed that fucking piece of information.
No, then that's how you know. That's how you know they know. Because you just got to look at it for 5 seconds and you realize how stupid it is.
Yeah, and if they know, then they're even more nefarious for pushing something that they know isn't true onto a population called humanity, right? Yeah. Because what they're going to come away with is just like they did with all the religion, the texts, right? Wouldn't let it be translated. They tried to hide it, keep it in Latin for as long as they could. And then Tyndale comes along and he translates it into English. And suddenly people start going, well, the priesthood is full of shit, because, you know, certain things that I'm reading aren't what they've been telling us for years, right? The kingdom of heaven is within, but I only thought it was in the Pope, right? No. So yeah, the cat's out of the bag. The bell's been rung. You can't unring it.
Yeah.
And it's only a matter of time. And I think necessity is going to dictate that more people are going to have to pay attention to this kind of a science that's true to nature and actually explains it, you know, in terms of a manual like form that you can reproduce. And I've seen it. I've seen multiple multiple examples of the laws of physics being broken. And we'll just leave it there because I'd love to go more into that, but it's going to be a matter of time, and the world's going to know that these so-called laws are fictions, and they should be buried, in the graveyard with the other lies.
Yeah, from
that have
stuff
held
back in the Victorian age,
Yep.
should be
And it's
buried with all
all
that other stuff.
it's all served to just hold humanity back. We should have been circling the stars by now, but we've been held back by the powers that never were, because we give our power to these nefarious entities instead of keeping it for ourselves and making a good use of it.
Michael Tessarion said something years ago that stuck with me, and it was, when in doubt, find out. And then that was it. Every time someone asked me a question I didn't know, and I was like, I'm going to go look into this.
Sometimes the simple is the truer,
Yeah, there's more mercury in a can of tuna. And I was like, I don't know if that's true, but I'm going to find out.
Yep.
in a poison shot. So, here, I'm going to put up this slide here because this is right what we're doing, what we're talking about. Let's see if it comes up. How's that?
There it is.
You're going to pass through the gate to inner wisdom. One need only open the doors of their mind. The greatest of all treasures lie in wait for you, for your discovery of what was always there. And that's you, Matt.
Well, I was telling you prior to this beginning of this interview that I've never seen myself in quotes. Like I'll quote myself from time to time because some things I like to say are profound, and I'll share those. But having seen somebody else actually take something I wrote and put it in, it's rare that happens. So I appreciate that. I'm kind of flattered and humbled by that. But and then you go, I said that, sometimes it's like, yeah, you even surprise yourself sometimes.
Well, yeah, I got a quote that I put in these slides there that I'd found in between sandwiching some other quotes. And I was like, did I write this? And I was kind of like looking it up, and I was like, oh yeah, I totally did. Maybe that's a good time to pull this one up too, because it's actually kind of right on what we were talking about. Let's see here. I'm an amateur, but I can do it.
There you go.
Look at this one. Look at those beautiful artwork from Russell.
Yep, I hung every one of those paintings in the new museum, and the Christ of the Blue Ridge there, even though it got destroyed, there was a second model. Fortunately, they made a duplicate, and that's also up in the museum. It represents the pinnacle of what man can become.
And I like that, the hands together, right? That's that center of that divided aspect. Yeah, this is something I wrote when I was reading The Disciples of Mysterium by Michael Tessarion, and it was unfinished, and I finished it recently, but I was like, did I even write this? And I was kind of like searching through Michael's work, on Kindle, you can kind of search for keywords, and none of this was in there, not a single word, right? So
you mind to go ahead and read it?
Yeah, I can read it. Operating from a viewpoint of a consciousness created world rather than a cosmic accident allows one to live a life of conscious creation. The cosmic accident mindset is what breeds the hedonism and destructive materialism of our current society. This devil may care attitude extends towards not only the individual who subscribes to this mindset, but also all living things that interact with it. The conscious created point of view is one of the true individual who puts energy towards creation and not destruction.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well said.
And that's what these mad scientists do, right? Like this attitude and this mindset of that explosion, heat, death, one-way universe doesn't just destroy their lives. It is affecting everyone around these people.
Yep. I mean, how many variations of cobra venom can you come up with synthesized?
Yeah, that's
right.
That's
I mean, you got nothing better to do but sit around and play with toxic poisons from sea snails. For God's sakes, man.
It's insane. How many viruses do you want to create?
Right. I mean, beam me up, Scotty. There's no intelligent life left in the university anymore. accepting the University of Science and Philosophy. This is where the difference is. And that's a university that's the science of man, which you should know why you're doing something before you do it. And that's the philosophy end of it. The science is the how to do something. Why would you do it is the philosophy again. But, you know, just because you can do something, this is the current mindset of materialist science. It's why Dr. Russell, he basically went off on the idea of experimenting, that you wouldn't need to experiment if you knew in your own mind the knowledge of what you were trying to prove. You could do the experiment in your mind and know if it was going to work or not. You would already know because you have the divine knowledge of what is going to happen if you mix two things together. And that's why he said his friend Hudson Maxim, the guy who invented smokeless gunpowder, blew his hand off because he was experimenting as opposed to going within and knowing, you know. But not everybody can do that. It takes time. And so you get these advanced people, again, the giants whose shoulders we stand on, and they bring these messages to us, these great, incredible plethoras of scholarship and study and lifetime of hard work to share, you know, to make the journey a little bit easier for those who follow behind. And, you know, again, it owes the respect of time. You know, no one's going to be able to just come along and sum these greats up in 2 sentences. It's going to take volumes to really understand all that they left. But while we are learning about them, we're also learning about ourselves, you know, and employing and embodying these concepts in our own beings, because they're shortcuts, they're players' manuals. You know, Jung wrote his player's manual. Russell wrote his. Shakespeare wrote his, and you know, basically a book is a player's manual for the author. It's how I did it, you know. And we learn these things, we learn these tips, and it makes our ability to play the game a little smoother, a little better, and we produce better results as we learn to embody the wisdom by knowing it, not just reading the words, but by literally having that integrative subject material become a subjective experience in your own life, and you can utilize it and use it, you know, to your advantage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't want to keep you too long because we kind of agreed on an hour.
Yeah, we talked about doing parts. What do you think?
Yeah.
How we do on slides there?
Well, I got a bunch of slides. Do you want to just go through some slides here before we shut her down today, or how are you doing with time?
Well, I mean, I'd like to keep it interesting. You know, 2 hours can be quite long for a person who's listening. So maybe if we just break it up and pick up from where we left off with the slides.
Okay.
You know, I don't mind to do 10 parts if you want to do 10 parts. We can do 3, we can do 2.
Cool.
Whatever you think, Luke. So
we'll see how we get
I'm
into
really
it.
enjoying the platform, and you know, it's nice to join you for again somebody that puts you into quotes.
Yeah.
You know, it's flattering, but thanks, and whatever you want to do, bud.
Yeah, cool. Well, we can shut her down maybe here in a few minutes. And I thought if we did a part 2, maybe on some of the Russell science, and then maybe another part on what sort of Buckminster Fuller called, you know, the building of the new medium, you know, that building of that new thing to replace the old. I found a lot of that in your work.
Yep.
Like there's no point in, like, the angry guy that just woke up, he's fighting against something. It's like, you can use your energy to just do something else, build something new that will replace that old system, right?
Yeah, it's gonna think of how much work it would take to burn down what's existing already. What you want to do, right, is exactly what Buckminster Fuller. Don't go to war with it. Build something new that makes the old philosophy inside of these already well-established buildings, right? We don't need to burn the Federal Reserves down. We need to turn them into homeless shelters, make them functional, or at least it's the body of, it's the spirit of the people that embody these buildings that gives it meaning. So if we don't change the way we look at the world and upgrade our thinking and understanding, then the structures won't change either. Structures are just structures. They're there to serve a purpose for people to gather, to go to these universities and such. They're beautiful architecture, many of them, but they just lack in a spiritual awareness, because that's what man has been guided into this box canyon of looking at the universe in a way that damages him for having this point of view. It's self-sabotage, and it's a self-inflicted wound. And whatever the order is behind it, ultimately they get off on seeing humanity shoot itself in the foot, because it gives them the ability to hide behind, a firewall where they get to understand the universe and how it works, while they laugh at everybody else for tripping over themselves trying to do the same. But it also erects a system where they have control. And that's the greatest illusion of all, because you can lose control very quickly. If you've ever been in a car wreck, if you've ever been in a ski accident, the wellest oiled machine in the world can have every perk, every benefit, every luxury, every accommodation, but there's still something so slight as something gets in the way, or it gets a little wet, and suddenly you find yourself without control. And that's where I would like to see the human race make a turn, to where these people lose the control that they think they have, because it's only going to happen one way, and that's when people as individuals take their individual power away from what they've been giving it to, which has allowed them to do the things they're doing. And the only way you're going to take control back is with knowledge. Knowledge is power, and it's so powerful it can crumble empires. And we're going to see where this heads.
Wow, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like they muddy the waters so that it won't reflect back to them what they really are too, right? Like it's like they've kind of come up with this chimera that, they don't get to see, their own withered and disgusting reflection, as
Yep.
long as we stay down here in the mud, but if we start showing that in our own lives, they will see that in themselves, so it's being that shining beacon for all to see.
Yep. And I just put a post up, basically, never assume the cabal is omnipotent. You do yourself a grave and foolish disservice to believe more in them than the power behind creation. And that power is in each and every one of us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the only thing that's permanent, is nature, the creator, right? And that's inside each and every one of us. So
that's correct. It's consciousness. And do you want to be conscious of your own consciousness is the question. And if the answer is yes, then you're on the path. But again, don't kid yourself, because he who dabbles 1 foot in the shadow, and even though he has 1 foot in the light, he's still in the darkness, and that's going to have a hold. So, it's easy to be evil. It really is. It's very easy to do the wrong things, to make the wrong choices. It's very difficult, but it's the most rewarding to take the harder road, the higher road, and make the hard choices and live a harder life, because it's not easy to be an honest human being. It's not easy to not screw your neighbor over because you want to get ahead. But these are the things that men do. It's the caveat emptor approach. Let the buyer beware. Screw them out of everything. Doesn't matter if we sell them something that doesn't work, like a vaccine. If this was a company, would anybody go back and buy another one if the first one didn't work? Why are they getting the fourth and fifth? Whether it's free or not, the logic is not consistent. And if you just look at this from a logical, fallacious, argumentative type mindset, you would see holes in all these structures. But this is what has to happen in order for humanity to upgrade, and it's not going to be easy. We've had it too good for too long, and it's time we enter boot camp and toughen up. The finest swords are tempered in the hottest flames. You know,
Absolutely.
and the fire of man's soul is due for a temperance. And, you know, it's not going to be easy, but what emerges on the other side will be refined and purified.
And it's, it's not easy in the moment, but in the long run, doing the wrong thing is always going to be harder. It's like the people who lie, it's like then you're just caught up lying and what lies have I told? And it's like,
Yep.
it's so hard to live like that. Just to live
Yeah.
honestly and be yourself,
Yep.
for me, is the easiest thing to do, and it shows them too. Like that's the thing they don't want, is for you to be honest and to live your own life,
Yeah.
because it shows them how false they are.
Right. And that you're not hooked to their yoke either. So you're not their anchor. They can't hook to you
Right.
and enjoy their status anymore.
Yeah.
And that's really, again, the fool marches out into the wilderness. He's done with civilization. It's not proven anything. And eventually he finds, what does he find? Himself. And then he realizes, damn, my city's on fire. I got to go back and help. Because it doesn't do any good to have the knowledge and not do something humane with it. You know, your whole purpose really, when you discover yourself, is to, go help other people, because, and in some way, your life is never going to be better unless other people's lives improve along with it. So a man can have all the knowledge in the world, but if he hoards it to himself, what good is it? Right? That's why these great men write books. Because it would be a crime if they kept it to themselves. It helps nobody that way. But ultimately, every little bit of power we can wrestle back from these machinations of psychopathy in endless forms, the better, because people are going to be able to use that for themselves as opposed to giving it away. And that's why I call them the powers that never were, because they just assume that they have this power, but it's only borrowed. And if it's ever taken back and reclaimed, they've got nothing. Okay. How can you launch a war if nobody will fight it?
Yeah. It's like that Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, right? It's like once that curtain comes back, that's the point we all need to get at, because everyone thinks it's this big monolithic thing. And oh my God, how can I ever take on the system that's been here for so long? And it's like, how you do it is one step at a time.
Yep.
One step at a time. And they don't have that power. That's the illusion, right?
Exactly.
The illusion of power that we're afraid of.
I mean, their factories, none of the things they own would even work if people didn't, provide the labor, provide the power for it, So yeah, it's going to be an interesting next few years. I've been seeing a lot of potential rising in humanity's spirit, and I'm grateful, very grateful for that. I like to think I did what I could to help, and it wasn't 2 months after we put that artwork officially opened with the grand opening, November 1st, 2019. 2 months go by and they plunged the world into darkness. So we delivered a lot of light to the world stage, my group and I, who I couldn't have done it without, John Bonsall, you mentioned, president of the university at this time. He's just a stellar individual who, I credit him a lot with the ability to get all that artwork hung. We hung over 500 paintings, drawings, did statuary and all kinds of other things. And there's others along the way too, but as they say, no man's an island. But I like to think that we put some light into the world, even to try to offset this dark spell that we're just now emerging out of. And it's time to put the art pedal to the metal and get creative and figure out a new system to replace this rotting corpse of a psychopath system that we now have to endure.
And that's the beauty, inspiration, imagination. Those are the things we need to start bringing forward into this world and doing the work. That's why I'm starting to do this show, is because I'm just want to do the work and I want to put some work out there. And even if, one person is touched by it, that's mission accomplished for me, one person at a time.
Well, then you're doing it for the right reasons. And I got to say, you've improved already, just having the slides and the ability to do that. You built some really great slides. And so I'm honored. I'd like to see your channel go to 100,000 subscribers. I guess I'm not that popular, I'm sure,
Yeah.
but
We'll go for 100 first.
Maybe something we said in this interview might propel that into that direction, but that's the hope anyways, right?
Yeah, I
If
hope
you do the
so.
work, the universe has to meet you halfway.
Yeah, and it's also part of that journey for me, that inner journey, and builds up confidence. And like you say, I've improved, and I really appreciate that, because it was you who kind of gave me that nudge and that a bit of recognition to sort of help me improve in that way, because I was kind of lost in the technical woods and I didn't know where to go, right? And you just kind of gave me a little piece of advice and I ran with it.
What was it Bilbo said? Sometimes you just need a nudge out the door, right? And you're on
Absolutely.
this divine journey, but you did the
Absolutely.
work, brother. If anybody, you can inspire a person, but ultimately they have to do the work. And that's a self-reward that should be recognized and cherished.
Mhm. That's your inner Gandalf. There's a few things you've said that kind of remind me of Gandalf, when I was talking to you on the phone there a few months back. You're like, I just go where I'm needed. And I was
Right.
thinking, what a Gandalf line that is. I just go where I need to be.
Yep.
So, well,
Yep.
thanks, Matt. I really appreciate this. And I would love to do a part 2, 3, 4, see
Sure.
what happens. And I'd love to have you back sometime soon.
Okay, that sounds great. I'll be very glad to join you again.
Awesome. We'll just keep in touch, and I hope everyone enjoyed this show, because we're just trying our best out here and trying to get information out, and I'm going to keep improving. And I know Matt's work is not done. So yeah, a little beacon of hope in this dark world.
We're not going to stop till we change it.
No, absolutely. Okay. See you, everyone.
Take care.